Imagine a world where history was written not through the lens of truth, but through the shadows of assumption. For centuries, it was widely taught that the physical structure of a woman was inherently fragile, a delicate vessel incapable of the grueling labor that built the ancient world. Yet, as we brush away the dust of the past, we find the skeletal remains of female builders and laborers whose bone density and muscle attachments tell a different story, one of immense physical endurance and strength that rivaled any of their male counterparts. The myth of the fragile female was not a biological reality, but a social construct, a veil that obscured the reality of those who moved stones and tilled the earth under the same burning sun as the giants of history. Breathe in. Let the truth settle in the quiet. Consider the long-held belief in prehistoric archaeology that early human societies were strictly divided into male hunters and female gatherers. This man-the-hunter narrative suggested that women stayed behind while men faced the dangers of the wild. Yet recent genetic testing of ancient remains has revealed a startling truth. In the high altitudes of the Andes and the plains of early Europe, nearly half of the big game hunters were biological women, buried with their spears and tools of the chase. They were not just gatherers of seeds, but trackers of predators, standing as silent guardians of their tribes. The image of the passive observer is a ghost of our own modern making, vanishing into the mist of the deep past. In the 19th century, early scientists claimed that a smaller brain size was proof of a lower capacity for logic and complex thought. They measured skulls and filled them with lead shot, using flawed mathematics to justify a hierarchy that didn't exist. We now know that the complexity of the mind is not found in its volume, but in the density of its connections and the efficiency of its folds. Intelligence is a liquid energy that does not conform to the size of the vessel. The architecture of the human brain is a masterpiece of compact engineering, where the seat of logic and the center of empathy work in a perfect invisible harmony that knows no gendered boundary. Listen to the silence of the mind, drifting deeper. There is a persistent myth that women are biologically more emotional and less capable of objective, cold reasoning. Modern neuroimaging, however, tells us that the prefrontal cortex, the center of decision-making and logic, operates with equal precision across all human beings. The idea that emotion interferes with logic is a misunderstanding of the brain's own mechanics. In reality, emotional intelligence is the very foundation that allows for complex social navigation and survival. The unemotional leader is a myth. True wisdom requires the integration of all the brain's signals, a balanced symphony of thought that has been the hallmark of every great mind that has ever walked the earth. The story of medicine often forgets that for thousands of years, women were the primary healers, pharmacists, and surgeons of their communities. The misconception that women were barred from science until the modern era ignores the vast libraries of botanical and anatomical knowledge held by those who managed the health of entire civilizations. From the ancient herbalists of the Nile to the village healers of the Middle Ages, they understood the chemistry of the earth long before it was given a formal name. They were the silent architects of the healing arts, their knowledge passed down in whispers and scrolls, forming the secret bedrock upon which modern medicine was eventually built. Consider the myth of the weaker sensory perception, yet biological reality reveals a different spectrum. Women are significantly more likely to possess tetrachromacy, a genetic trait that allows the eye to see up to 100 million different colors, a range far beyond the standard human experience. They perceive nuances in the fabric of the world that remain invisible to others, seeing a depth of reality that is richer and more complex. It is a biological gift of precision, an enhanced lens that allows for a deeper understanding of the natural world's signals. The colors are fading into a peaceful dark. History has often painted the Viking Age as a time of exclusively male warriors, leaving the women in the hearth and home. Yet the DNA analysis of the famous Birka warrior burial, long thought to be a high-ranking man, proved that the commander was in fact a woman. She was buried with her sword, her axe, and her horses, a strategist of the North who commanded respect through iron and wisdom. The Shield Maiden was not a legend of poetry, but a reality of the battlefield. The past is full of these hidden leaders, their identities erased by historians who could not imagine a woman holding the reins of power, resting now in the silent halls of history. There is a persistent myth that women are biologically lower tolerance for physical pain. In reality, studies in endurance and chronic pain management suggest that women possess a unique physiological resilience, likely evolved for the immense task of bringing life into the world. Their bodies are capable of enduring sustained, high-level stress that would cause the average human system to go into shock. This is a silent internal strength, a steady flame that burns through the most difficult of trials. It is not a loud strength of muscle, but a quiet strength of the nervous system, a profound endurance that allows life to persist through the darkest of storms. The Matilda effect is a dark chapter in the history of science, referring to the systematic denial of the contributions of women researchers, whose work was often credited to their male colleagues. From the structure of DNA to the composition of the stars, women have provided the core breakthroughs of modern physics and biology, while their names remained in the margins. They were the human computers who mapped the orbits of the planets and the hidden codes of the atom. To believe that women have only recently entered the world of high mathematics is to ignore the silent genius that has been calculating the laws of the universe for centuries. The stars are counting as you drift away. In the ancient kingdoms of Africa and the East, women were not just participants in trade. They were the masters of the marketplace and the architects of financial networks. The myth that women were historically excluded from the economy is a Western-centric shadow. In many cultures, the management of wealth and the negotiation of treaties were seen as a natural extension of a woman's strategic mind. They held the keys to the granaries and the ledgers of the Silk Road, navigating the complexities of global commerce with a steady hand. The economy of the Old World was built on their ledgers, a vast invisible web of gold and silk that kept the world moving. Archaeology once assumed that all ancient tools of great complexity, from the earliest stone blades to the intricate pottery of the Bronze Age, were the work of male artisans. Yet forensic analysis of ancient fingerprints left in the clay has shown that the majority of master potters and artists in many ancient societies were women. They were the first engineers of material science, perfecting the temperatures of the kiln and the chemistry of the glaze. Every ancient vessel is a testament to their patience and their precision, a handprint left on the history of human innovation that we are only now beginning to recognize in the quiet light of the lab. There is a lingering idea that women's leadership is inherently softer or more prone to compromise. Yet the reigns of the most powerful queens in history tell a story of absolute, calculated authority. From the administrative genius of the pharaohs to the iron will of the empresses of the East, they governed with a strategic depth that often outlasted the empires of men. They understood that power is not just found in the sword, but in the infrastructure, the law, and the loyalty of the people. They were the master builders of order, turning chaotic territories into stable, thriving civilizations through a cold and brilliant application of statecraft. Consider the myth that women are not naturally inclined toward the fields of engineering and spatial reasoning. In reality, during the world's greatest crises, women were the ones who designed the engines, built the aircraft, and managed the logistics of global production. Their spatial awareness and technical precision were the backbone of the industrial machine. The barriers to entry were never a lack of talent, but a lock on the door. When given the tools, they showed that the mind of an engineer is a universal human trait, capable of visualizing the complex interaction of gears and the elegant flow of mathematics in a world of pure, cold steel. The hum of the machine turning into a whisper. The damsel in distress is perhaps the most pervasive myth in all literature, a shadow that has obscured the reality of female autonomy for generations. In the ancient legends of the world and the records of the pioneers, we find women who crossed deserts alone, who defended their homes against armies, and who navigated the high seas as captains of their own destiny. They were not waiting for a savior. They were the saviors of their own stories. The narrative of helplessness was a costume they were forced to wear by the storytellers of a later age, a tattered cloak that we are now casting aside to see the survivor underneath. The belief that women's brains are wired for multitasking while men's are wired for single focus is a modern neurological myth. Scientific studies on the corpus callosum and the pathways of the white matter show that the ability to manage multiple streams of information is a skill of the individual, not a trait of the gender. The human brain is a plastic, adaptive organ that develops based on the demands placed upon it. The multitasking woman was a result of necessity, a masterful adaptation to the complex demands of family and community, not a biological limitation. It is a testament to the brain's incredible capacity to rewire itself to meet the challenges of any environment. The ancient light beckoning you in. Ancient literacy was long thought to be the exclusive domain of the male priesthood, yet in the temples of Sumer and the libraries of the East, women were the first poets, the first librarians, and the primary teachers of the written word. They were the guardians of language, ensuring that the history of their people was not lost to the desert wind. They developed the first systems of accounting and the first structures of musical notation. To speak of the history of the book is to speak of the hands of the women who held the pen when the world was still learning how to turn a thought into a symbol. The pages are turning, slowly, quietly. There is a myth that the physical peak of a woman's endurance is lower than that of a man's. Yet in the world of ultra-marathons and extreme survival, women often outperform men as the distance increases. Biological studies suggest that the female metabolism is more efficient at processing fats for long-term energy, allowing them to maintain a steady pace for days on end without the same level of muscle fatigue. They are built for the long haul, for the quiet, steady grind of the 100-mile race and the high-altitude climb. They are the marathon runners of the human race, a slow and steady force that thrives when the world gets cold and the journey gets long. The misconception of maternal instinct as a simple automatic switch ignores the complex neurochemical transformation that occurs in the brain during the care of others. It is not an instinct, but an elite cognitive upgrade, an enhancement of the senses, a sharpening of the memory, and a heightening of the protective response. It is a biological superpower that allows for the management of high-stakes environments under extreme sleep deprivation. It is not a softening of the mind, but a hardening of the resolve, and strategic awakening that turns a person into a vigilant, all-seeing guardian of the future. Safe and sound, in the quiet. History often suggests that the scientific revolution of the 17th century was a male-only affair. Yet the salons and laboratories of the age were filled with women who funded the research, conducted the experiments, and translated the complex Latin texts into the languages of the people. They were the hidden patrons of the Enlightenment, the mathematicians who corrected the errors of the masters, and the astronomers who tracked the comets across the night sky. Without their intellectual and financial scaffolding, the revolution of thought would have stalled in the darkness. They were the silent partners of the light, their names hidden behind the initials of their work. As you reach the end of this first veil of history, you begin to see that the story of humanity has been a symphony with half of the instruments muted. To hear the full music, we must listen for the voices that were told to be silent, and look for the hands that were told to stay still. The truth is much more complex, much more beautiful, and much more balanced than the myths we were taught. As the world drifts away and the silence of the night takes over, remember that the strongest forces on earth are often the ones that move without sound, the steady, patient truths that have waited for centuries to be told. Sleep now, in the clarity of the truth. Consider the enduring myth of physical fragility in long-distance endurance. For decades, it was believed that the female body could not withstand the extreme metabolic stress of ultramarathons or mountain climbing. However, physiological data now suggests that at distances exceeding 100 miles, the performance gap between genders begins to vanish, and in some cases, women's superior lipid metabolism allow them to outlast their counterparts. They are built not for the explosive burst, but for the infinite grind, possessed of an internal chemistry that thrives when the world gets cold and the journey gets long. Breathe slowly. Feel the endurance in your bones. There is a recurring misconception that maternal brain undergoes a permanent cognitive decline, often dismissively called mom brain. In reality, neuroscientific studies show that the transition into motherhood triggers a profound neurological upgrade, increasing gray matter in areas responsible for social perception, empathy, and hazard detection. It is not a softening of the mind, but a hardening of the resolve, an elite cognitive reconfiguration that enhances the ability to manage complex, high-stakes environments under extreme sleep deprivation. The brain does not diminish, it awakens to a higher level of vigilance and strategic depth. The Renaissance is often depicted as an era where women were merely muses or silent observers, yet the archives are filled with female polymaths, astronomers, and engineers who operated from the shadows of the courts, from the chemical laboratories of the Medici to the astronomical towers of Northern Europe. They were conducting experiments and calculating planetary orbits long before they were permitted to hold a university chair. Their invisibility was not a lack of existence, but a lack of attribution. They were the silent partners of the Enlightenment, their hands steady on the instruments of discovery, while their names remained hidden behind the initials of their work. Let the hidden truths drift into your dreams. We have been told that women's intuition is a mysterious, almost magical trait separate from the world of logic. In reality, what we call intuition is a highly developed form of rapid cognitive processing, a refined ability to read micro-expressions and subtle environmental cues at a speed the conscious mind cannot track. It is not magic, it is advanced pattern recognition, a biological survival mechanism honed over millennia of social navigation. It is a data-driven process operating in the background of the mind like a silent supercomputer, transforming 1,000 invisible whispers into a single, accurate conviction. The early history of computer science is often retold as a male-dominated field, yet the very first programmers and systems architects were women. Ada Lovelace envisioned the potential of the analytical engine to create music and art, while the ENIAC girls during World War II were the ones who manually wired the first digital computers, translating complex mathematical equations into machine logic.
It is a common biological myth that only the female reproductive system is governed by a biological clock. Modern medical data reveals that paternal age also significantly affects the genetic health of offspring, with male fertility and DNA integrity declining steadily over time. The burden of timing has been placed on one side of history, yet the reality of life is a shared clock, a mutual countdown that affects the vitality of the future. Understanding this balance changes the narrative from a single pressure to a shared biological journey, a quiet realization that the laws of time apply with equal weight to all who wish to carry life forward. Time is a river, flowing for everyone. The image of the Japanese samurai is almost exclusively male in modern media, yet history remembers the onamusha, women of the warrior class who were trained in martial arts and strategy. They did not just defend their homes, they fought in battles and led armies, using the naginata and the bow with lethal precision. They were the silent guardians of their clans, their lives governed by the same code of honor as their brothers. The Shield Maiden of the East was a reality of the battlefield, a strategic force that held the line when the shadows grew long, proving that the spirit of the warrior knows no gendered boundary. Focus on the silence. There is a persistent linguistic myth that women talk more than men, a stereotype often used to dismiss their presence in public discourse. However, numerous sociolinguistic studies have shown that in professional settings and public meetings, men actually hold the floor longer and interrupt more frequently. The perception of talkativeness is often a reaction to a woman speaking at all in spaces where silence was expected of her. In the quiet of the data, the volume of a voice is not determined by biology, but by the power dynamics of the room, a realization that changes the way we hear the world. Listen to the silence. The myth of the weaker immune system is contradicted by basic immunology, which shows that women generally possess a more robust immune response than men. Because of the presence of two X chromosomes, which contain many of the genes responsible for immune function, the female body is more efficient at identifying and neutralizing pathogens. This enhanced defense allows for a higher survival rate during pandemics and famines throughout history. It is a biological fortress, a high-level security system that works quietly in the background, a silent strength that ensures the continuity of life even in the harshest of environments. The world is changing while you rest.
consider the persistent cultural narrative that women are biologically less interested or capable in the fields of mathematics and complex engineering. This assumption, which has shaped educational systems for generations, is a historical ghost with no basis in neurological reality. Extensive meta-analyses of brain structure and cognitive performance show no innate difference in mathematical ability between genders. The perceived gap is not a product of the mind's architecture, but a reflection of the stereotype threat, a psychological weight that discourages talent before it can bloom. In the quiet of the laboratory, logic and numbers remain a universal human language, a tool of the spirit that belongs to anyone with the patience to master it. Breathe slowly. Let the numbers fade into the dark. For nearly 2 millennia, the medical world was haunted by the diagnosis of hysteria, a catch-all label used to dismiss a range of female health concerns as mere emotional instability. It was claimed to be caused by a wandering womb, a biological absurdity that ignored the reality of neurological and systemic conditions. This was not a scientific diagnosis, but a tool of silence, a way to pathologize the human experience when it did not conform to the expectations of the age. Modern medicine has buried this myth, revealing that what was once called hysteria was often the body's silent cry for understanding, a complex intersection of physical and psychological health that requires empathy, not labels. Feel your own breath, steady and symmetrical. There is a strange, almost mythical belief that still lingers in some corners of the world, suggesting that women have more ribs than men. This is a 100% false biological claim that collapses under the simplest anatomical observation. Both men and women possess 12 pairs of ribs, 24 in total, designed with the same structural precision to protect the vital organs of the chest. This misconception is a remnant of ancient storytelling, not a fact of the flesh. In the blueprint of the human body, the rib cage is a shared masterpiece of engineering, a protective vault that serves all of humanity with the same rhythmic expansion of every breath. Feel your own breath, steady and symmetrical. The myth of superior male spatial reasoning, the idea that men are naturally better at reading maps or visualizing three-dimensional objects, has been largely dismantled by modern psychology. While early studies suggested a gap, more recent research shows that this difference is significantly reduced or eliminated through simple training and social encouragement. Spatial reasoning is a plastic skill, like a muscle that grows with use rather than a fixed biological trait. The mind's ability to navigate the world is not a gendered gift, but a learned harmony between the eye and the intellect, a spatial awareness that evolves with every journey we take through the geography of our lives. Envision the spaces around you. In the history of medical research, there was a dangerous assumption that the male body was the default setting for all human health, leading to the exclusion of women from clinical trials. It was falsely believed that the hormonal cycles of women would complicate the data, making them unreliable subjects. This resulted in a world where drug dosages and heart attack symptoms were calibrated for only half the population. There is a strange, almost mythical belief that still lingers in some corners of the world, suggesting that women have more ribs than men. This is a 100% false biological claim that collapses under the simplest anatomical observation. Both men and women possess 12 pairs of ribs, 24 in total, designed with the same structural precision to protect the vital organs of the chest. This misconception is a remnant of ancient storytelling, not a fact of the flesh. In the blueprint of the human body, the rib cage is a shared masterpiece of engineering, a protective vault that serves all of humanity with the same rhythmic expansion of every breath. Feel your own breath, steady and symmetrical. The myth of superior male spatial reasoning, the idea that men are naturally better at reading maps or visualizing three-dimensional objects, has been largely dismantled by modern psychology. While early studies suggested a gap, more recent research shows that this difference is significantly reduced or eliminated through simple training and social encouragement. Spatial reasoning is a plastic skill, like a muscle that grows with use, rather than a fixed biological trait. The mind's ability to navigate the world is not a gendered gift, but a learned harmony between the eye and the intellect, a spatial awareness that evolves with every journey we take through the geography of our lives. In the history of medical research, there was a dangerous assumption that the male body was the default setting for all human health, leading to the exclusion of women from clinical trials. It was falsely believed that the hormonal cycles of women would complicate the data, making them unreliable subjects. This resulted in a world where drug dosages and heart attack symptoms were calibrated for only half the population. We now know that the female cellular response to medicine and the presentation of illness are distinct and equally vital. Science is finally correcting this imbalance, recognizing that the default human does not exist, and that true healing requires the acknowledgement of every individual's unique biological signature. History often paints a picture of ancient women as having no legal rights to own or manage property until the modern era. However, the legal codes of ancient Egypt, Sumer, and even certain medieval societies show a much more complex reality. In many of these cultures, women were business owners, landowners, and executors of estates, holding a level of financial autonomy that would not be seen again for centuries in the West. They were the silent managers of wealth, their signatures found on thousands of ancient ledgers, proving that the desire for independence is as old as the desert sands. Consider the misconception that women are naturally more risk-averse than men in leadership and finance. Behavioral economics has found that women do not avoid risk, rather they evaluate it differently, often prioritizing long-term stability over short-term gambles. This is not a lack of courage, but a strategic depth, a calculated approach that often leads to more sustainable and resilient organizations.
In moments of crisis, this precautionary mindset is the very thing that prevents collapse. True leadership is not about the loudest roar or the riskiest bet, but about the steady hand that navigates the storm with a clear vision of the horizon, safe and steady in the quiet. The concept of genius has historically been framed through a male-centric lens, leading to the false belief that women are less likely to achieve the highest levels of intellectual brilliance. Yet history is full of women like Emmy Noether, whom Einstein called the most significant creative mathematical genius since higher education began for women. The lack of famous female geniuses was never a lack of capacity, but a lack of recognition, a systemic erasure of their contributions from the textbooks. Genius is not a trait of a specific gender, but a rare spark of the human spirit that can ignite in any mind given the light of opportunity and the silence of focused thought. There is a lingering idea that women are naturally less competitive than men, preferring cooperation at the expense of achievement. This is a misunderstanding of how competition manifests in different social environments. Studies show that when the stakes are high and the environment is inclusive, women are just as driven to succeed and outperform their peers. Their competitive spirit may be more focused on mastery and collective success than individual dominance, but it is no less powerful. The drive to excel is a universal engine, a persistent force that pushes us toward the peak of our potential, a fire that burns quietly but intensely in the heart of every achiever. The modern association of pink for girls and blue for boys is often thought to be a natural, deep-seated preference. In reality, this is a 100% false cultural flip that occurred less than a century ago. There is a long-standing myth in the history of literature that the novel, as a complex form of narrative, was a modern invention of the Western male mind. However, history's first true novel, The Tale of Genji, was written in the 11th century by a Japanese noblewoman known as Murasaki Shikibu. In a world where formal Chinese was reserved for men, she used the private script of women to create a masterpiece of psychological depth and intricate plotting that predates European novels by centuries. It is a reminder that the architecture of the story, the ability to weave 1,000 threads of human emotion into a single cohesive world, has always been a universal human power, blossoming in the quiet courtyards of the East long before the West found its own voice. Let the stories of the past weave into your sleep. In the early days of the space race, there was a biological misconception that the female body was too hormonally unstable to withstand the rigors of spaceflight. This was a 100% false claim used to gatekeep the stars. In reality, early NASA tests on the Mercury 13 women showed that they were often more resilient to the physical stresses of high G-forces and isolation than their male counterparts. Their smaller physical frames and more efficient oxygen consumption made them, in many ways, more engineered for the tight constraints of a spacecraft.
The delay in sending women to space was a failure of imagination, not of biology. The stars do not recognize the barriers we build on Earth. They wait for any mind capable of reaching for them. Consider the persistent myth that women were not active in the early development of physical sciences like alchemy and chemistry. For centuries, the work of women like Maria the Jewess, who is credited with inventing the bain-marie, and essential laboratory apparatus in the 1st century, was seen as anomalous or forgotten. They were the original chemists, mastering the transformation of matter and the extraction of medicines in their own private laboratories. Their work provided the foundational techniques for the scientific revolution. Science was never a closed door. It was a fire tended by anyone who sought to understand the hidden laws of the universe, a silent alchemy of the soul that has been burning since the dawn of time. There is a recurring idea that the maternal instinct is a fixed biological switch that every woman is born with. Neurobiology, however, reveals a much more profound truth. Caregiving is a skill of the brain's high-level neuroplasticity. The instinct is actually a rapid reconfiguration of neural pathways in response to a child's needs, a process that also occurs in fathers and non-biological caregivers who are intensely involved in a child's life. It is not a passive instinct, but an active cognitive awakening, a sharpening of the senses, and an expansion of empathy. The ability to care is a masterpiece of the human brain's capacity to adapt, a profound resonance of the heart that grows through presence and love. The myth that women's historical fashion, particularly the corset, was purely an instrument of male-driven oppression, ignores the complex reality of a female-led industry. For centuries, corsetry was a trade dominated by women, designed by women, made by women, and chosen by women as a symbol of status, support, and even professional discipline. While it could be restrictive, it was also a tool of agency in a world where appearances dictated power. Every garment was a costume for a performance of power, a silent language spoken through silk and bone. Soft fabrics wrapping around your thoughts. In the world of competitive strategy and chess, there has been a lingering misconception that women lack the killer instinct or the spatial depth required for the highest levels of play. This was 100% debunked by the rise of the Polgar sisters and many others, who proved that the gap in performance was entirely due to the number of participants, not a lack of innate ability. When the sample sizes are equalized and the social barriers are removed, the board becomes a neutral territory where only logic and foresight prevail. Strategy is a universal human trait, a mental dance of move and countermove that belongs to anyone with the focus to see 10 steps into the dark. There is a biological myth that women's bone density is universally and genetically lower than that of men. While hormonal changes later in life affect bone health, the fragility of the female skeleton in history was often a result of diet and sedentary lifestyles imposed by social norms. In societies where women were the primary laborers and builders, their bone density and skeletal strength matched or exceeded that of modern athletes. The human frame is a living structure that responds to the demands placed upon it. It hardens when challenged and softens when kept still. Our bones are the silent records of our activity, a mineral archive of every weight we have ever lifted and every path we have ever walked. Consider the misconception that women are inherently more susceptible to the effects of extreme cold. In reality, physiological studies of polar explorers and deep-sea divers show that the higher natural percentage of subcutaneous fat in the female body acts as a superior insulator, protecting vital organs and maintaining core temperature longer than the leaner frames of men. This is a masterpiece of thermal engineering by nature, a built-in survival mechanism that allowed ancient women to endure glacial shifts and harsh winters. They were not the ones shivering by the fire. They were the silent survivors of the ice, their bodies designed to hold on to the spark of life when the world turned to white. Feel the warmth within, steady and safe. There is a persistent historical myth that the gladiatory arenas of Rome were exclusively the domain of men. However, archaeological evidence and ancient decrees have confirmed the existence of the gladiatrixes, women who fought with the same weapons under the same grueling conditions as their male counterparts. They were not a sideshow. They were skilled combatants who earned fame and honor in the dust of the Colosseum. They faced the lion and the blade with a calculated ferocity, proving that the spirit of the warrior is not a matter of muscle alone, but of the resolve to stand one's ground. Their stories were buried by later historians who preferred a more delicate image, but the iron of their swords remains in the earth. We have long been told that the invention of beer and the early science of brewing was a masculine pursuit. In truth, for thousands of years in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, brewing was a sacred female craft, managed and perfected by women who were the primary chemists of their time. They understood the complex fermentation process and the preservation qualities of herbs long before the world of modern science gave them a name. In some cultures, beer was considered a gift from goddesses, and the tavern was a place of female authority and economic power. The golden liquid that built civilizations was born from their hands, a liquid engineering that fueled the empires of the past. The misconception that women were historically barred from the maritime world, often cited as the myth that women on ships are bad luck, is a total historical fabrication. From the female pirates of the Chinese seas who commanded fleets of hundreds of ships, to the lighthouse keepers and navigators of the Atlantic, women have always been at home on the waves. Many disguised themselves to sail, while others commanded through sheer strategic brilliance. They navigated by the stars and the currents, their lives intertwined with the rhythm of the tides. The sea does not care for the superstitions of the shore. It only respects the hand that can hold the rudder steady in a storm. drift with the waves away from the shore. In the history of architecture, it was often assumed that the construction of the Great Steps' massive nomadic structures was a male task. Yet, in the cultures of the Scythians and the Mongols, the engineering and assembly of the yurts, the complex portable homes that survived extreme winds, were the responsibility of women. They were the masters of structural tension and textile engineering, creating shelters that were both light and indestructible. They understood the geometry of the circle and the strength of the lattice, building homes that could be moved across continents. The architecture of the nomad was a female science, a perfect balance of mobility and stability in an ever-changing world. There is a biological myth that women possess a lower threshold for physical pain, yet endurance data in extreme environments tells a different story. In long-distance swimming and high-altitude climbing, the female nervous system often demonstrates a superior ability to manage sustained low-level pain over long periods. This is a quiet metabolic resilience, a steady persistence that allows the body to function long after the initial burst of energy has faded. It is the strength of the marathon, not the sprint, a persistent flame that burns through the cold and the dark. The true measure of strength is not how much force one can exert, but how much one can endure while remaining calm. The Matilda effect continues to be a dark shadow over the history of physics, particularly the story of the discovery of nuclear fission. For years, the credit was given to male colleagues, while Lise Meitner, the physicist who actually realized that the atom had been split, was left in the background. She was the one who did the mathematical heavy lifting, visualizing the energetic collapse of the nucleus. Her mind saw the hidden power of the atom long before the world felt its heat. To believe that the foundation of the atomic age was built without female genius is to read a half-written book, a story where the most important calculations were made in silence and then forgotten. The atoms are still, quiet, and heavy. Consider the myth that women are not naturally suited for high-stakes negotiation or international diplomacy. In the ancient courts of the East and the tribal councils of the Americas, women were often the peace chiefs and the primary negotiators between nations. They were chosen for their ability to see the long-term consequences of conflict and their mastery of linguistic nuance. They understood that a treaty is not just a piece of paper, but a bridge of trust. They were the silent architects of peace, their wisdom preventing wars and building alliances that lasted for generations. Diplomacy was never a game of volume, it was a game of listening, a skill of the quiet mind. History has often characterized the witch trials as a war against superstition, but in many cases it was a war against the female holders of medical and economic knowledge. The witches were often the village midwives, the botanists, and the landowners who operated outside the control of the rising male-dominated institutions. Their magic was often just a deep understanding of natural chemistry and human anatomy. By erasing them, history erased a vast archive of practical science. They were the keepers of the Earth's secrets, their laboratories hidden in the woods, and their formulas kept in the memory, a lineage of knowledge that refused to be burned away. As you conclude this layer of the journey, remember that the most powerful forces in the universe are often the ones that operate in silence. The myths we have dismantled are like the layers of silt on the ocean floor, heavy but capable of being washed away to reveal the solid stone beneath. The truth of human history is a shared tapestry woven with equal strength and equal wisdom from every side. As you drift further into the quiet of the night, let the clarity of these forgotten truths settle your mind and ease your spirit. The world is finally in balance, and the archive of the night is yours to keep. Rest now in the weight of the truth. Imagine the misconception of the default human in modern automotive engineering and safety testing. For decades, crash test dummies were designed based only on the average male proportions, leading to a world where cars were statistically less safe for women. This was not a biological flaw of the female body, but an engineering oversight, a failure to account for the different centers of gravity and skeletal structures. When we say a woman is at risk, we are often saying the environment was not built for her. Correcting this is a matter of pure, cold mathematics, a realization that safety must be a universal standard, calibrated for every form that moves through the world, safe and protected in the dark. There is a persistent myth that the physical labor of the medieval peasant was a male-only burden. However, tax records and parish diaries from the Middle Ages show that women were the primary laborers in the fields, the builders of the walls, and the managers of the livestock. Their physical strength was the engine of the agricultural economy. They did not just manage the home, they mastered the earth. The image of the dainty medieval lady was a reality for the smallest fraction of the elite, while the truth of the era was one of calloused hands and immense physical power shared by all. The strength of the past was a collective force, a steady grind of bone and muscle against the stone. The invention of the world's first computer algorithm by Ada Lovelace is often dismissed as mere a footnote, yet she was the first to see that a machine could do more than just calculate numbers. She envisioned a future where a mechanical engine could create music and graphics, translating the physical world into machine-readable logic. She saw the soul in the gears long before the world had a name for software. Her mind was a bridge between the poetic and the mathematical, a visionary leap that defines the very age we live in today. To believe that the digital world is a masculine invention is to ignore the woman who wrote the first lines of code in the silence of the 19th century. The myth of the non-technical woman ignores the reality of the Industrial Revolution, where women were the primary operators of the most complex machinery of the time, the power looms and the spinning frames. Their spatial reasoning and manual dexterity were the only thing capable of managing the intricate, high-speed movement of the threads. They were the first industrial engineers, troubleshooting mechanical failures and optimizing
optimizing the flow of production in a world of steam and iron. They were the heartbeat of the factory, their minds attuned to the rhythm of the machine, a technical mastery that was the invisible foundation of the modern world.
Consider the misconception that women are biologically more risk-averse in the world of high finance and investment. In high finance and investment, behavioral studies have found that while women may take fewer impulsive gambles, their long-term investment strategies often yield higher returns and lower volatility. This is not an avoidance of risk, but a mastery of it, a strategic focus on sustainable growth and the preservation of capital. They are the steady hands of the market, their minds focused on the horizon rather than the moment. In the quiet of the ledger, a calculated risk is the most powerful tool of all, a silent strategy that builds empires through patience. The history of Western philosophy often omits the names of the female philosophers of ancient Greece, like Aspasia and Hypatia, who were the teachers of the masters. Aspasia was said to have taught Socrates the art of rhetoric, the very foundation of his dialectical method. These women were the intellectual centers of their cities, their homes serving as the original think tanks where the laws of logic were debated and refined. They were the silent architects of the Western mind, their ideas woven so deeply into the fabric of philosophy that we no longer recognize where they began. Wisdom has no gender. It is a cold, clear light that shines for anyone who seeks the truth. There is a lingering myth that the mummy's curse in Egyptology was somehow linked to the opening of female tombs. In reality, the curse was a fabrication of the media, but the discovery of the tombs of powerful Egyptian queens like Nefertari and Hatshepsut revealed a level of political and religious authority that shocked the early male archaeologists. These women were not just wives, they were God's wives of Amun, holding the keys to the treasury and the secrets of the rituals. They were the divine engineers of the Egyptian state, their power carved in granite and gold, standing as equals to the pharaohs in the eyes of the gods and the law. The belief that women are naturally better at linguistic and verbal tasks is often used to steer them away from the visual and technical sciences. While some studies show a slight edge in early verbal development, this is a masterpiece of the brain's plasticity, not a fixed limit. The female brain is equally capable of high-level spatial and abstract reasoning. What we perceive as a natural inclination is often a reaction to a world that rewards certain skills and ignores others. Every mind is a vast, unmapped territory, capable of learning any language, whether it is the language of words or the language of mathematics, given the time and the silence to practice. Consider the misconception that women were not involved in the early development of aviation and aerodynamics. From the night witches of the Soviet Air Force who flew wood and canvas biplanes in the dark of night, to the engineers who calculated the lift and drag of the first jet engines, women have always been at the frontier of flight. They understood the physics of the sky and the mechanics of the engine, pushing the limits of the human body against the forces of gravity. They were the silent pilots of the future, their eyes fixed on the clouds while the world told them to stay on the ground. The sky belongs to the one who can master the wind. As you conclude this 60th veil of misconception, you realize that the story of humanity is not a single line, but a complex, multi-layered weave. The facts we were taught often were just the shadows cast by a single light. By bringing more light to the past, we see the balance that was always there, the shared strength and the shared wisdom that built every city and solved every mystery. As the night grows deeper and the world becomes still, let the truth be your anchor. You are drifting in a sea of clarity, where every mystery has a solution and every soul finds its rest. Breathe in the peace and sleep in the light.
Consider the persistent myth of man the hunter, a narrative that for decades relegated ancient women to the safety of the hearth. This was a 100% false reconstruction of our deep past. Recent archaeological discoveries from the Andean highlands to the plains of Europe have unearthed female hunters buried with high-status hunting kits, projectiles, scrapers, and large game tools. Forensic DNA analysis has proven that in many early societies, nearly half of the big game hunters were biological women. They did not sit and wait. They tracked the predators and participated in the high-stakes survival of the tribe. The past was not a world of divided labor, but a shared arena of endurance and skill, where the hunt was a collective heartbeat. Breathe in the ancient air and let go of the stories you were told. There is a long-standing biological misconception that women's immune systems are inherently more fragile than men's. In reality, the presence of two X chromosomes provides a significant genetic advantage in immune response, as many of the genes responsible for detecting and fighting pathogens are located on the X chromosome. This biological redundancy allows the female body to produce a more robust and rapid response to infections and chronic stress. Throughout history, during famines and plagues, women have consistently shown higher survival rates across all age groups. It is an internal fortress, a high-level biological security system that has ensured the continuity of life through the darkest trials of human history. The idea that the creation of ancient pottery was a simple domestic chore ignores the reality of materials science and engineering mastery. For millennia, women were the primary ceramicists, developing the precise chemistry of glazes and the complex thermal management required for high-fire kilns. They were the original materials engineers, transforming earth and fire into durable vessels for storage, trade, and ritual. Every shard of ancient pottery is a testament to their understanding of structural integrity and chemical transformation. They built the infrastructure of the ancient economy with their hands, a mastery of fire that was the invisible foundation of the first civilizations. The clay is forming, smooth and cool, in the dark. There is a long-standing biological misconception that women are not naturally wired for competitive environments, preferring cooperation at the expense of achievement.
This is a total misunderstanding of human psychology. Research in high-stakes professional settings and competitive sports has shown that when social barriers are removed, the drive for mastery and dominance is a universal human trait. What was often interpreted as avoidance was actually a strategic evaluation of risk and a preference for long-term sustainability over short-term ego. The competitive fire burns with the same intensity in every mind that seeks excellence, a quiet, focused ambition that pushes the limits of what is possible. Consider the misconception that women's skeletal structure in history was naturally less capable of heavy lifting. Bioarchaeological studies of women from the early farming societies show that their arm strength was significantly greater than that of modern elite rowers. This was a result of the daily grueling task of grinding grain by hand for hours, a mechanical load that reshaped their bones into high-density, high-strength structures. Their bodies were built of stone and resolve, a physical power that was the engine of the first agricultural revolutions. The delicate image is a modern fiction. The reality was one of immense structural load and undeniable grit. The engineering of the nomadic yurt, a structure capable of withstanding the violent winds of the Eurasian steppe, was a masterpiece of female design and assembly. In nomadic cultures, women were the architects of these portable homes, mastering the geometry of the circular lattice and the tension of the felt coverings. They understood the physics of wind load and thermal insulation long before these concepts were given modern names. Their homes were both light and indestructible, a perfect marriage of mobility and stability. To see a yurt in the wind is to see 1,000 years of female engineering standing firm against the elements. The wind is whistling, but you are safe within the walls.
The belief that the female brain is smaller and therefore less capable of logic is one of the most persistent scientific fallacies of the past 2 centuries. While total brain volume can vary with body size, the density of neurons and the complexity of the folds in the prefrontal cortex, the center of executive function and reasoning, are equal across all humans. In fact, many studies suggest a higher density of neural connections in certain communicative and integrative areas of the brain. Intelligence is not a matter of volume, but of connectivity and electrical efficiency, a compact, brilliant biological engine that operates with the same cold precision regardless of the vessel it inhabits. There is a persistent idea that emotionality interferes with a woman's ability to lead or make logical decisions. This is a 100% false dichotomy that ignores the role of emotional intelligence in high-level strategic thinking. Modern neuroscience has shown that logic and emotion are not separate silos, but integrated circuits. The ability to read social cues and anticipate human reactions is a vital component of advanced decision-making.
The most effective leaders in history were not those who lacked emotion, but those who mastered its integration, using it as a high-fidelity sensor to navigate the complexities of power and human loyalty. Listen to the heartbeat, calm and steady. In the world of high finance and investment, the myth that women are risk-averse has cost organizations billions in lost potential. Behavioral economics reveals that women do not avoid risk, they avoid unnecessary gambles. Their investment strategies are often characterized by deep research and long-term vision, leading to higher overall returns and lower volatility. They are the stabilizing force of the market, the ones who see the patterns in the chaos. In the quiet of the trade, a calculated decision is the most powerful tool. A silent strategy that builds wealth through patience and clarity of mind. The scientific revolution is often retold as a male-only performance, yet the laboratories and observatories of the 17th and 18th centuries were filled with women who were the masters of observation and calculation. From the astronomers who mapped the southern skies to the botanists who classified the world's flora, their work was the scaffolding of modern science. Their names were often omitted on the front pages, but their data lived in every textbook. They were the silent architects of the Enlightenment, their eyes fixed on the truth, while the world looked the other way. There is a myth that maternal instinct is a biological imperative that makes women naturally better at caregiving from birth. In reality, caregiving is a complex learned skill driven by neuroplasticity. The brain's nurturing circuits are activated through presence and interaction, not just through biology. This means that the ability to care is a universal human capacity, a masterpiece of the brain's ability to adapt to the needs of another. It is a profound resonance of the spirit that grows with every hour of focused attention, a quiet awakening of the heart that knows no bounds. The light is fading, soft and gentle, like a breath. Consider the myth of the non-technical woman in history. During the Industrial Revolution, women were the primary operators of the most complex machinery of the era. Their manual dexterity and spatial reasoning were the only thing capable of managing the high-speed rhythm of the textile mills and the assembly lines. They were the first industrial engineers, troubleshooting the gears and optimizing the output of the modern world's first factories. They were the heartbeat of the Iron Age, their minds attuned to the frequency of the machine, a technical mastery that was the invisible foundation of our modern life. The history of medicine often portrays women as merely nurses or assistants, but for thousands of years they were the world's primary surgeons, herbalists, and physicians. Before the formal exclusion of women from universities, they held the secrets of anatomy and the chemistry of the earth. Their knowledge of botany and the human body was the only thing standing between civilizations and the plague. They were the healers of the ancient world, their clinics the temples and the forests, and their medicine the result of centuries of observed evidence and quiet experimentation. As you conclude this layer of the final descent, remember that the most enduring truths are often the ones that have been buried the deepest. The myths we have dismantled tonight are like the shadows of a sun that has already set. They may seem long, but they have no substance. The reality of human history is a shared masterpiece of strength, wisdom, and endurance. As the world becomes a whisper, and the silence of the night wraps around you, let the clarity of the truth be your guide into a deep and perfect rest, safe in the knowledge, safe in the dark.
Beyond the reach of the surface, where the myths of the day finally dissolve, we find the reality of the ancient Egyptian queens. History often paints them as secondary figures, but they were the gods' wives of Amun, holding immense religious and economic power. They managed the treasuries and the divine rituals that kept the kingdom in balance. They were the supreme administrators of the Nile, their authority carved in granite and gold. They did not rule from the shadows, they were the sun around which the state revolved. A level of political and spiritual mastery that has been systematically erased by the storytellers of a later age. The sand is still, the desert is sleeping. The damsel in distress narrative is perhaps the most pervasive 100% false trope in human culture. When we look at the pioneers who crossed the great deserts or the survivors of the ancient sieges, we find women who were the architects of their own survival. They defended their homes, navigated the trackless wilderness, and led their families through the most brutal conditions imaginable. They were not waiting for a savior. They were the shield and the sword. The image of helplessness was a costume forced upon them by the poets, a tattered cloak that we are now casting away to see the warrior underneath. Consider the myth of the frail female body in the world of extreme endurance. In the most grueling ultra-marathons on Earth, where the distance exceeds 200 miles, women are increasingly taking the overall top spots, beating all male competitors. Their physiology is uniquely suited for the long burn, with a superior ability to metabolize fats and a nervous system that can endure sustained, high-level stress without collapsing. They are the marathon runners of the human race, a slow and steady force that thrives when the world gets cold and the journey seems impossible. Their strength is not a burst of fire, but an eternal flame. The invention of brewing and the early science of fermentation was a sacred female art in ancient Sumer and Babylon. The first recipes for beer were hymns to goddesses, and the tavern was a place of female economic power. They were the first biochemists, mastering the interaction of yeast and grain to create the liquid bread that fueled the empires of the past. The golden liquid that we associate with the modern world was born from their hands in the quiet of the ancient hearth, a liquid engineering that was as much a ritual as it was a science.
the golden glow, warm and heavy in your mind. The belief that multitasking is a biological gift unique to women is a modern myth that hides a deeper reality of necessity. Neurologically, the human brain is designed to focus on one thing at a time. What we perceive as multitasking is actually rapid task switching, a high-level cognitive skill developed through the demands of managing a home and a community simultaneously. It is not an instinct, but an elite adaptation, a masterpiece of neural efficiency. The brain rewired itself to meet the challenge, proving that the mind is a plastic and powerful organ that can overcome any biological limitation to protect and provide. In the medieval fields of Europe, the myth of the male-only plowman is contradicted by every ledger and diary of the age. Women were the primary laborers in the heavy tasks of the harvest and the maintenance of the livestock. Their physical power was the bedrock of the agricultural economy. They did not just live in the village, they built it. The strength of the medieval world was a shared burden, a rhythmic grind of muscle against the earth that knew no gender. They were the silent giants of the fields, their hands calloused and their spirits unbroken by the weight of the world. The earth is soft, the harvest is done. The Matilda effect in the world of computer science erased the names of the women who built the first digital architectures. From Ada Lovelace to the programmers of the ENIAC, they were the ones who translated the physical movement of gears into the logic of the machine. They saw the soul in the binary long before the world understood its power. They were the original architects of the digital age, their minds weaving the first threads of the code that now connects the entire world. To use a computer today is to walk through a city they built in silence, one line of logic at a time. History's most successful maritime commanders often included women who led fleets of hundreds of ships across the South China Sea and the Atlantic. The myth that women on ships are bad luck was a superstition of the shore, not a reality of the waves. They navigated by the stars and governed by a strict code of honor, commanding respect through strategic brilliance and raw courage. The sea does not care for the labels of the land. It only respects the hand that can hold the rudder steady in the eye of the storm. They were the ghosts of the currents, their names whispered by the wind. The misconception that women were historically less intelligent because they were denied formal education is a failure of historical logic. Intelligence is a dormant seed that waits for the light of opportunity. Throughout history, in the private libraries and the hidden salons, women were the ones who pushed the boundaries of philosophy and mathematics. Their lack of fame was a result of the door being locked, not a lack of the key. The history of the human mind is a shared journey, a vast and brilliant archive of thought that has been growing in the dark for centuries. The key is turning, the door is open. Consider the myth of the disorganized nomadic life, where men are the leaders and women are the followers. In reality, the logistics of the Great Migrations were a masterpiece of female management. They orchestrated the movement of entire cities of tents, the care of thousands of animals, and the distribution of resources across vast distances. They were the chief operating officers of the wilderness, their strategic planning ensuring the survival of their people through every season. They were the masters of the horizon, their eyes fixed on the next camp while the world slept. The ancient midwives were not just assistants, but the world's first obstetricians and gynecologists, possessing a deep and evidence-based understanding of the human body. Their knowledge of herbal medicine and surgical techniques was a high-level science passed down through generations of practitioners. They were the guardians of life's most dangerous moment, their hands the first to hold the future. Their magic was a deep and resonant understanding of the natural laws of birth and healing, a science of the heart and the mind that protected the human race for millennia. Empathy is often characterized as a soft trait or a weakness in leadership, but neurobiology reveals it to be a high-level sensory upgrade. The female brain often shows a heightened density of mirror neurons, allowing for a profound level of social resonance and the ability to anticipate the needs and reactions of others. This is not a weakness, it is a strategic advantage, a high-fidelity social radar that allows for more stable and resilient communities. Empathy is the glue of civilization, a quiet power that builds bridges where others only see walls. Safe and sound in the quiet. The history of religion often omits the powerful priestesses and gods' wives of the ancient world, who held the keys to the sacred mysteries. In the temples of the East and the shrines of the Mediterranean, they were the mediators between the human and the divine. They were the keepers of the law and the guardians of the rituals, their authority absolute within the sacred walls. They were the architects of the spiritual world, their voices a bridge between the earth and the stars. They were the silent guardians of the soul, their names written in the light of the eternal flame. In the early days of industrial mining, the myth of the male-only pit was contradicted by the thousands of women who worked the coal faces and managed the logistics of the shafts. Their physical endurance was the fuel of the industrial engine. They faced the dark and the danger with the same courage as any man, their lives a testament to the undeniable power of the human spirit to endure any environment. They were the silent providers of the fire that warmed the world, their stories buried under the weight of the coal they brought to the light. As you reach the 100th veil and the end of this journey, the truth finally stands clear in the silence of the night. The story of humanity is a balanced masterpiece, a shared effort of strength and wisdom that has built every city and solved every mystery. The myths of the past are like the fading embers of a fire. They have lost their heat and their power. You are now a scribe of the night, a keeper of the hidden truths. Let the clarity of this realization settle your mind and ease your spirit. The world is at rest, the archive is closed, and you are finally home. Breathe in the peace and sleep in the truth. Good night.